And as we turn the page and start a new year, let us do a quick year in review here and look at the biggest happenings in the world of wrestling in 2024. I've been keeping a running list of what I would consider to be all of the big events that took place across various promotions. And it's funny looking back at this list, this first item, these first couple of items, pales in comparison to everything else that happened. But at the time, it was kind of a big deal when we saw Nick Nemeth and Ryan Nemeth show up at Wrestle Kingdom 18. And we had Nick brawling with David Finlay. And then we had Nick Nemeth debuting at TNA Hard to Kill as their big surprise signing back on January 13th. Right? Not a lot of talk lately about Nick Nemeth, but he is the TNA World Heavyweight Champion. They have given him the chance to be a world champion in their company. And the matches of his that I have seen have been good. He's going to be defending his title against Joe Hendry at their pay-per-view coming up on January 19th, which I figure is where Hendry is finally going to win that title. And then we'll see him pop up in the Royal Rumble match. But Nick Nemeth is somebody who spent so many years, 20 years, or nearly 20 years, in WWE. A lot of hot and cold, start and stop. Yes, he was a world heavyweight champion there, but not for very long. And he was never pushed as any kind of a serious, star. But there were moments where they could have, and they just never took full advantage of it. So he was somebody who felt like a lifer in that company. And then he decided, I don't want to be here anymore. Right? He was making really good money. And he was doing his, stand-up comedy stuff on the side. And he could have just continued to coast. And he would have been a great utility player for them off the bench. Remember when they sent him to NXT for that run, made him the NXT champion, and he dropped the belt to Braun Breaker? Like, that's how they viewed him. And he could have just maintained the status quo, but he wasn't happy doing that. He said, you know what? I can do better. I can do more. Before I get too old, let me go out there and spread my wings and show that I could be a world champion and I can be a player. And that's what he's done. He's worked some indie shows as well. We had him in for a House of Glory show, booked the match with him and Vikingo. I mean, he's been all over the place. But that's how the year started, with him showing up for the first time in New Japan. It feels like a lifetime ago. Kazuchika Okada left New Japan for AEW. The announcement came on January 18th. And it shocked the hell out of me because I didn't think he would actually leave. I mean, we knew that his contract was coming due. And I wouldn't have been surprised by any talk about him testing the free agent waters. But in the end, I just couldn't imagine Okada, their top star, leaving the company and coming to America. But that's exactly what he did. He took a deal that we don't know the exact numbers, but I'm sure he took many millions of dollars because this was a major move for him. He had to uproot his life, his family. So he took a huge money deal to come work for Tony Khan, who has largely protected him during his time in AEW. Now, the Okada of New Japan is a very different beast than the Okada that we have seen in AEW. That match he had last night in the finals of the Continental Classic with Will Ospreay is the closest thing to a New Japan Okada performance that we've gotten so far. So we know he still has it in him. But they made him the Continental Champion almost instantly. He's had that title ever since. He just won the C2. And they're already teasing, finally, a big match with him and Kenny Omega coming up in 2025. So where he goes from here, he's a heel right now, even though people cheer for him. He does tend to be one of the more entertaining people on the roster. But Okada decided, you know what? This is my opportunity. This is my opportunity. I'm never going to get this chance again if I sign a new long-term deal with this company. So I can go to WWE, who would have loved to have had him. I mean, Triple H, there was talk about why Shinsuke Nakamura was getting a television push at the time, and it was their way of trying to lure Okada over to WWE. As if the push that Nakamura was getting was such a great push that it was going to be the singular factor that convinced them, hey, you know what? If they're doing this with Shinsuke, maybe I should be there. Give me a fucking break. Although I would have liked to have seen what Triple H would have done with Okada, as compared to what Tony Khan has done with him. But he made his choice, and honestly, it was one of the biggest surprises to me of the entire year. We also got the announcement that Raw would be moving to Netflix starting in January of 2025, a 10-year deal, which I think might be 5 years with an option for 5 more. I don't remember all the specifics, but it's a 10-year deal basically for $5 billion. And now we are about a week away. It's finally upon us. Raw debuts on Netflix and moves back to 3 hours next Monday. This is a big deal. This is the start of what they're going to be calling the Netflix era in WWE. And it's the first time that one of their major shows, one of their major weekly shows is going to be streaming, leaving cable and streaming. They're still going to have a cable footprint. They've still got SmackDown and they still got NXT, although NXT is on broadcast television, but they still have SmackDown on USA. So what they have done here is they have basically dipped their toe in all of these different places. They're going to have a presence on streaming. They're going to have a presence on cable. They're going to have a presence still on broadcast television. It's smart. Instead of just being in one place, they're going to have basically a footprint in all of these different places, and they're getting $5 billion for this deal. So that kicks off next week. That was a huge announcement because for months we were wondering who's going to land the rights to Raw. They're going to stay on USA? Are they going to go to an FX, sign a deal with Disney? Are they going to go to Amazon? But they ended up going with the biggest streaming service in the world. The other big thing also was, these last few months, having Raw revert back to 2 hours, which for me at least was a big deal. And I'm going to greatly miss 2-hour Raws. We're getting our final one tomorrow night. But because they had no place to put the show, because their deal really with USA was to have ended, I think, October 1st, they had to work out a separate deal to keep the show on USA for, an extra few months. And we ended up getting 2 hours of Raw out of it, which is perfectly fine. And you could certainly put on a good show at 2 hours, but it was always meant to just be temporary. We had The Rock getting the rights to his name and joining the TKO board of directors. So Rock is on the board. He's got a lot of sway. Vince McMahon resigning from WWE after rape and sex trafficking allegations lobbed against him in a lawsuit brought by one Janelle Grant. This sent shockwaves through the wrestling industry. To say that this was a blockbuster announcement, a bombshell of a news story would be an understatement. And this was the final nail in the coffin for Vince McMahon, who initially he retired on Twitter. He retired via tweet in the summer of 2022, but he never really left. And of course, he worked his way back into things and was still around, even though Triple H was booking by this point, but he was still around. And Vince wanted to come back so that he could orchestrate the sale to Endeavor. And you heard Ari Emanuel at the time that the deal was contingent upon Vince still being a part of the company. He wanted Vince to still stick around. And we saw Vince with his evil movie villain mustache on CNBC talking about, talking about how what a big deal this was and everything. And so he was still very much in the mix until this lawsuit dropped. And at that point, him working for the company, it just wasn't tenable anymore. I mean, yes, it's allegations, but it is the most horrendous allegations when it comes to this type of case. And there's just so much information in there. And so many specifics about certain things in there. And it's going to be a while before this gets litigated. It's a civil case. It's not criminal. But he could not continue on. And it was the pressure put upon him by Endeavor because they were starting to lose sponsors. Sponsors were putting their partnerships on pause. This would have been very, very bad for WWE. So Vince, he decided, okay, for the best interest of the company, I will step aside. I will resign. I will completely relinquish any and all responsibilities. And that was it. That was the final nail in the coffin. That is what, after all these years, all these decades, what did in Vince McMahon. And no matter how this case resolves, this lawsuit, whether it goes to arbitration, he's still trying to get it into arbitration. I don't care how this ends. Even if everything gets dropped and she doesn't get a dime and the whole thing goes away. Vince McMahon is not coming back to WWE. He is damaged goods. He is forever tainted. And that's what it took. It took his being stupid and his being an evil asshole and this woman coming forward with this lawsuit to finally put him out to pasture once and for all. CM Punk went and he tore his triceps in the Royal Rumble match, and that threw things into a state of chaos because CM Punk's return to WWE at Survivor Series last year was one of the biggest stories of the entire year. And his first match back, his first televised match back, was the Royal Rumble match, and he got hurt. So all the plans that there were for him to be at WrestleMania this year and wrestle Seth Rollins all went out the window. So CM Punk got hurt. It took him out of the mix for a number of months. The Rock nearly stealing Cody Rhodes' WrestleMania match against Roman Reigns. That also will go down as one of the biggest stories of the entire year. We all lived through it. We all saw the shows. We all heard the news stories at the time. God knows I ranted and raved about it. He tried. The Rock thought he was going to be real slick. He thought, okay, we got this great idea. Cody's going to be the magnanimous one. He's going to step aside so that I can get my match against Roman. Everybody's going to love it. And it blew up in his fucking face. And to his credit, Rock realized, okay, this didn't work out the way that I had hoped it would. And they decided to go in a different direction with it. We got heel Rock back for the first time since 2003, which is something I honestly never thought we would see again. But we got it. It all worked out in the end. But boy, was there a lot of politicking going on. That segment on SmackDown with Cody, the look on his face, man, he's got a terrible poker face. He looked like somebody shot his dog in the middle of the street. He looked so sad. But it was the fans online who absolutely lost their shit, and it just blew up in Rock's face. And so we all know how things ended up at WrestleMania this year, but that was a massive story earlier this year. Rossi Ogawa, fired from Stardom by Bushiroad, ends up starting a brand new promotion called Marigold, which has at least a loose working relationship with WWE. This was also a banner year because it was the final match ever in the career of Sting. Sting had his retirement match at AEW Revolution against the Young Bucks. It was Sting and Darby against the Bucks, defending their AEW tag team titles successfully back on March 2nd. Sting got about as great of a retirement and a send-off for a wrestler as you could ever ask for. The only thing that I could think of that would be comparable would be the send-off that WWE gave Ric Flair in 2008, and he fucked it up by coming back and going to TNA. So Sting's retirement and his retirement match may go down as the greatest retirement that any wrestler, veteran, has ever gotten. Certainly as far as one of the big promotions go. I can't think of anything that's even comparable. The one thing you cannot say, of all the things you could say about Tony Khan and Tony Khan's booking and all the bullshit this year, Tony Khan did right by Sting. Tony Khan's use of Sting and the way that he treated him and the respect and the reverence that he treated him with from the beginning until the very end, he did something that WWE never did with Sting. He gave him a proper send-off. And it was a great match, and him with his sons being there dressed up as Sting from different points in his career, the way the whole thing was handled outside of the dumb stuff that Darby did in the match, it was just perfect. Mercedes Moné made her debut with AEW at their big business show in Boston back on March 13th. And ever since the end of May, she has reigned undefeated as the TBS champion. It was a very curious decision to bring her back, not bring her back, but bring her in mid-March and not have her wrestle a single match until the end of May. She wasn't hurt, but they had a date in Boston, and they said, well, she's from Boston. We got to bring her in now. And then she didn't do much of anything for 2.5 months. That was a very dumb decision. But at the time, she came in with a lot of fanfare, and it's been a very mixed bag on Mercedes during her run in AEW. It's a weird thing because you look at the matches, by and large, the matches that she has had, and she's had some excellent matches. Like, you look at her in-ring work, and even if you include some of the stuff outside of AEW, some of the New Japan Strong stuff, she's had some great fucking matches this year. She's had some of the best women's matches of 2024. But it's about more than just the matches. So you look at her promos and you look at the programs and the feuds that she has been involved in. You look at the pairing with Camille, which should have been a success. And what Tony Khan did with the booking of Mercedes and Camille needs to be studied for what not to do. What a fucking giant fail that turned out to be. That's why I say it's a very mixed bag with Mercedes. Can't argue with the in-ring work, but it's about more than just that. Cody Rhodes finished his story and ended the run of Roman Reigns as the undisputed champion at WrestleMania 40, Night 2, back on April 7th. You really couldn't write a better finale than they did with Cody and Roman this year. It was all overbooked to hell. You got to see everybody involved. You got to see John Cena. You got to see The Undertaker. You got to see Seth Rollins. You got to see Jey Uso and Jimmy Uso and The Rock, and everybody and their mother was involved in this match. But that's what pro wrestling is at its core. It's about storytelling. It's about emotion. And the one thing you can't say about WrestleMania this year is that it did not have a very fitting, emotional finale. It's what pro wrestling is all about. It's what it's built on. That's what made it so great. As overbooked as it was, you knew it would be going in once you knew the stipulation for the match. But we got a great ending. Cody got that. He finally got that finish to his story that he was looking for. And whatever you may think about his run as WWE champion this year since then, that was the perfect finale to that story. Then we had AEW airing the Brawl In footage following CM Punk's interview with Ariel Helwani. This was on the April 10th episode of AEW Dynamite. This was one of the most embarrassing events all year in any promotion. Tony Khan felt like he had to rely on CM Punk, who doesn't even work for the company anymore, to pop a rating. And it worked for one night. And it's been downhill ever since. Whatever good he thinks that Jack Perry may have gained from this, it absolutely was not worth the embarrassment of airing that footage in the first place, 8 months after the fact. Unless you believe that it may have gotten them a new deal with Warner Brothers Discovery. Because during an episode this week of Wrestling Observer Radio, Dave Meltzer and his co-host, Garrett Gonzalez, they were talking about this. Garrett posed a question to Meltzer asking if he thought that Tony Khan, in retrospect, might have second thoughts about airing that footage. And Meltzer talked about Tony Khan's perspective because he's talked to Tony Khan about this. He says, I've discussed this with him. You have no idea how much he believes that that was a key to getting that deal, referring to their media rights deal with Warner Brothers Discovery. So I will tell you, in every discussion, there's not even a thought in his mind that he made a mistake there. If it helped make the deal, then he's right. But I certainly didn't think long-term it was the right thing, even though, yes, it did help make Jack Perry a star. I just didn't think it was positive for the company in the big picture. If Tony Khan honestly believes that without them airing footage of a backstage fight from 8 months earlier with somebody who doesn't even work for AEW anymore, that without that, they may not have been able to get a new television deal, that doesn't speak well to the health of his company. That it took CM Punk to get them a new TV deal. That is pathetic. The biggest AEW story of the year was getting that 3-year media rights deal. They have an option for a 4th year. But that deal is said to be worth nearly $600 million in total. That gives them a lot of breathing room to weather whatever storms may come their way, and it shows that Warner Brothers Discovery is invested in them for the foreseeable future. That is a huge deal for Tony Khan. It's good for the wrestling industry as a whole, and it keeps AEW around for years to come. But if that is the biggest AEW story of the year, which it is, the second biggest story of the entire year is the ratings for Dynamite and how they have cratered from where they were at the start of 2024. When this year began, Dynamite was averaging between 800 and 900,000 viewers every single week. As we close out 2024, Dynamite is averaging between 500 and 600,000 viewers every single week. The last time they drew 1 million viewers was February of last year. The last time they hit 900,000 was October of last year. The last time they hit 800,000 was April, when they brought back CM Punk for one night. They haven't touched 800,000 since. The last time they hit 700,000 was September 25th. The lows just keep getting lower. This is despite big free agent signings like Will Ospreay and Kazuchika Okada and Mercedes Moné and re-signing MJF. Despite all of this, they have hemorrhaged around 350,000 viewers from where they started the year to where they ended it. That's 350,000 people that have up and vanished. Where did they all go? Why did they leave? What was it that made them go, oh, you know what? I think I've had enough. You can cry bad faith all you want, because I know the sickos don't like hearing it, but the numbers don't lie. Facts don't give a fuck about your feelings. It's a hard dose of reality that a lot of their most loyal fans just can't accept it, but it's real. And they may not worry about it if they like the product, right? You don't have to worry about it. You can just continue to like the product. But it is an issue that Tony Khan is going to have to address in 2025. We had Jon Moxley beating Tetsuya Naito to become the IWGP World Heavyweight Champion back on April 12th. We had Jack Perry returning to AEW and the Elite attacking Tony Khan and giving him a TK driver on Dynamite. That was back on April 24th. They dropped Tony Khan on his head. We had Shad Khan making an appearance on Dynamite for the first time, showing concern for his son. And then within a few days, Tony Khan was in the war room, I guess, during the NFL draft. He had a big neck brace on. And it wasn't that much longer before he was back. We had Adam Copeland breaking his leg, coming off the top of the cage in his match with Malachi Black at Double or Nothing back on May 26th. Jordynne Grace showed up in NXT to challenge Roxanne Perez. That was the beginning of the partnership that has continued between NXT and TNA. It has not bled into the main roster, not yet, but they are still working with each other. We had, of course, other people as well. Joe Hendry and others have since showed up in NXT. The Wyatt Six debuted. We had the return of Bo Dallas to the company. We had the Wyatt Six. They massacred the entire Monday Night Raw roster, or almost the entire roster, back on June 17th. Jacob Fatu debuted on SmackDown and wiped out Cody Rhodes, Randy Orton, and Kevin Owens in his very first night. This was back on June 21st. And Jacob Fatu, even though we haven't seen him work more than, I think, one singles match so far, but everything they've done with him so far has set him up for great success in 2025 and beyond. Adding him to the bloodline is going to end up being a game changer for the bloodline. Once he breaks away from Solo and we see him doing more, I don't know if he'll end up leading that version of the bloodline or not, but just adding him to the roster is just such a huge addition because he's just such a special talent, and it's just inevitable that at some point he's going to get a monster babyface run. So the fact that he finally, after all these years, came to the company this year was a big deal. We had AJ Styles working a Pro Wrestling Noah show in July against Naomichi Marufuji. The same night, Io Sky worked a match for Marigold in Japan. That was back on July 13th. We had the return of Roman Reigns at SummerSlam. This time he came back as the OTC. Came back as a babyface, even though he has done absolutely nothing different to warrant the reactions that he is getting from the crowd, other than they just see him as a big star and they want to cheer for him. He's still the same douchebag that he was the last time we saw him. But he is technically back as a babyface. We had Ricochet make the decision to leave WWE for AEW. And he debuted at Wembley Stadium. That was the same night that Nigel McGuinness returned to the ring for the first time in many years. He was also a surprise that night. But Ricochet and Samantha Irvin, both leaving WWE in the same year. We had the Vince McMahon docuseries dropping on Netflix back on September 25th. I have a full review of that up on the YouTube channel and here on the podcast. That's for all 6 episodes. So you can find my thoughts on that there. We had the NXT premiere on the CW network back in October, and Julia making her NXT debut, wrestling Roxanne Perez on that show back on October 1st. They're going to wrestle again at New Year's Evil this week. Not this week, but next week. I think Julia will become your new NXT Women's Champion, and we're going to see Roxanne very shortly on the main roster. We had the end of Bryan Danielson's full-time career in 2024. That last match he wrestled against Jon Moxley at Wrestle Dream back on October 12th. He was they put a plastic bag over his face, and we have not seen him since. Although he was backstage apparently at World's End last night. Hasn't had surgery on his neck, says he needs surgery. He's trying to go the all-natural route, I guess, and get stem cell treatment. He may just be delaying the inevitable. I don't know when we're going to see Bryan back in the ring. I presume at some point in 2025, but that's not a guarantee. But this was the end for Bryan Danielson, if not forever, because I don't believe that, but as a full-time performer. And he had one of the best years of his career. When you look at the matches he had and the work he put in the ring and the story, that story that played out with him and his family out there when he won the championship at Wembley Stadium in front of 50,000 people. You talk about great ways to kind of cap off a career. If that night turned out to be the last night in the ring for him that he ever had, that would have been a tremendous send-off for him. It wasn't, but that was such a great moment. But despite all the injuries, you look at the matches, the body of work that he put in this year in AEW, even the matches he had in Japan, it's just incredible. The level that he can still perform at, even with all of the injuries that he's been dealing with, is why he will go down as one of the all-time greats in the business, bar none. Zack Sabre Jr., for the first time in his career, became IWGP World Heavyweight Champion, this after winning the G1 Climax, but he won the title back on October 14th. Hiroshi Tanahashi announced his retirement match for the Tokyo Dome would be taking place on January 4th, 2026, and that he would have his final year in the ring next year. Motor City Machine Guns, after 18 years of working together, finally made their debut in WWE, and within a couple of weeks, they beat the Bloodline to become SmackDown Tag Team Champions. I still maintain the Machine Guns got the spot that was earmarked for the Lucha Bros, but good for them. I'm glad that they're finally getting a run on the WWE main roster. They didn't even go to NXT. They just sent them directly to SmackDown. WWE also announced a new independent wrestling development program, their new ID program. We still don't know all the details, and there's a lot of pros, there's a lot of potential cons to it, and we'll see how it progresses and expands over time. But this could turn out to be one of the bigger wrestling stories of the next few years, depending on how this program plays out. Bobby Lashley left WWE. He made his debut for AEW as part of the Hurt Syndicate back on October 30th. We had the introduction this year of women's mid-card titles. We have a women's United States champion in Chelsea Green, and the first ever women's intercontinental champion is likely to be crowned. I think January 6th is where that's going to take place. Bill Goldberg announced his retirement match would take place in WWE in 2025. Against who and where and when, we don't know, but Billy Boy is going to call it quits next year. The New Day, after years of just sort of spinning their wheels and not really doing a whole lot of anything, got interesting for the first time in a very long time this year. We had a New Day heel turn on Big E with their 10-year anniversary celebration on Raw back on December 2nd, and what a heel turn it was. It was a tremendous piece of business, one of the best segments on Raw all year. We also had the return of a classic. We had the return of Saturday night's main event on NBC with Jesse the Body Ventura back on December 14th at the Nassau Coliseum. Jesse will be back on January 25th in San Antonio. They're going to be continuing these specials, 4 of them per year, so basically 4 per quarter. But it was great. It was a nice dose of nostalgia going back in the time machine. Seeing and hearing Jesse on commentary again was great. So that was a lot of fun. We also had the return of the Winged Eagle Championship. This is one of the bigger surprises of the year. If you would have told me at the beginning of the year, hey, Solomonster, we're going to get the Winged Eagle belt back on TV, I would have said, fuck off. Don't tease me like that. But we got it. We got it, at least for now. We got it for another month. And Tessa Blanchard made a surprise return to TNA Wrestling. This is her second chance. This is her chance to right the wrongs in the past that have gotten her blacklisted, basically, from the two major promotions, and show that she can be a good little soldier and be on her best behavior. And if she can be, I have every expectation that within a year and a half, we're going to see her in WWE. But a lot of that is going to depend on how things go for her in 2025. But the way that TNA brought her back in the dark of night, I said, like, basically they smuggled her in like contraband, was embarrassing. Because they knew they wanted to avoid the backlash that they knew bringing her back would bring. So they were like, we got to do it in silence. We have to do it quietly. Once we do it, it's already done. But the fact that you even had to do that in the first place should probably tell you that maybe this is not the best decision to be making, or maybe you should do it in a different way. But this is the decision that Anthem made. It's TNA. Right, there's still a little bit of that old TNA left over. I know it's a new regime there. I know it's a very different company, but there's still some of that LOL TNA to be had. And those are your big stories in wrestling in 2024. What will 2025 bring? I can only imagine.